Well, I think like if you're totally new to computer science, like you can totally like take like intro class in college. Like you don't really need to know anything about computer science before you wait, sorry, before you go to college. But it's always good to start early. So what I can recommend is you can take some online courses during your gap year, like or during your free time. They are free online. There are a lot of them. You can pick like a language that you want to learn, or like just the most basic one, which is Python, and then like learn that. Or you can like if you want like internship or like research, you can definitely do that. I mean, internship is like a little bit harder to get, I guess, but like you can like if you're like in Hanoi, I think like there are like research courses at like I don't know like Yen or something like that. You can do that. Yeah, like if you have connections, you can do internship, or you can go take some like offline courses in like in the city. I think there are like 9X or something like that in Hanoi and in other cities too. So yeah, like there are a lot of ways you can get started early.
Thank you. Luke, do you have anything to add, to share for this? I mean, in general, how do you prepare well for college?
Yeah, well, the question of how do you prepare well for college is another workshop in and of itself. But what I will say is I'll piggyback off something that Bing said, which is probably like what you learn in high school is not as important as learning how to study well. Study effectively, manage your time, know your own kind of limits, knowing how to rest. I'm so glad that people talked about like rest during this gap year panel. Like actually learning how to take care of yourself is so important because so many people go to college and they just burn all the way out, right? It's just they just go like from 0 to 100, and and it's not that good. So definitely like learning the study skills is the number one thing. I think related to computer science and computer engineering, there are so many, right? The first thing is make sure your math is solid. Particularly any engineering discipline, make sure your math is solid. Depending on what school curriculum you're in, the good news is that there is like every level of math is on the internet basically for free. So if you need to take like linear algebra or BC calculus or multivariable calculus, it's on the internet, right? Just you need to have a little bit of like self-discipline for sure, but the stronger your math is, the better your positioned you're going to be if your goal ultimately is an engineering major. If you're looking at computer science, again, algorithms, learn if you can get like a baseline level of like algorithms, that's solid. I think what I appreciate is Quynh did not immediately say learn how to computer program, because I think a lot of people assume that coding is like the first thing you need to learn for computer science, and it's just not. Like coding can be a component of learning computer science, but it's certainly not the most important for being prepared to do well in intro computer science classes. If ultimately your goal is to go into computer engineering, learning Python is cool, but it's not necessarily the first thing that I would recommend. Learn Python if you're interested specifically in learning Python or specifically in coding, but don't necessarily start there, I would say.
Great. Well, the next question is, the next few questions is somewhat similar. Is, I easily get distracted and unmotivated during time like this. COVID time at home, and also when people have too much free time. How can I become more self-disciplined?
Zhang? I'll take on this one. Actually, I'll just touch base on what Minh Huyen already said. Just take on something new. I legit decided to take on the ukulele like 2 months ago. 2 months ago, and this is like the situation of my nails, so like I have to keep it long on one hand so that I can play the ukulele. Really take on a new project if there's that something you've been thinking about doing for a long time now, but you never had time to do it. Maybe learn a bake, learn a crochet or whatever, make yourself busy, get things to do.
Right.
Also, like just to add a little bit on that, because okay, I am a master procrastinator. People would know this. I'm just I just think that when you procrastinate, you have like something in mind. So when you're doing like nothing, or when you're watching Netflix or whatever it is that you're doing to procrastinate, you're thinking about work, so you're not resting at all. So I think like it's best, in at least what I did was I tried to actually rest. So I tried to do something that would make me feel very comfortable and do not think about work like at all. And I think after that, it gives me like some clarity, because like resting is boring. So, I mean, boredom is good in some sense at some point. But like after resting, you would feel much more prepared to do whatever it is you want to do. And you would have like plans, you'd think a lot about your future and what you have done, have you been doing. And I think just that rest would give you like clarity on what to do next. And after that, it's just a flow. So that's my thought.
Well,
Actually,
oh, sorry. Luke, go ahead.
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, no,
I'll go after you.
There's a part of this questions that, I easily get distracted. And for me, it does happen is, when you do have your calendar and you want to do things and you have enough rest, but then you get distracted, maybe because you have many things you want to do or because you're on your phone a lot. How do you deal with this, or curb your distraction to minimal amount?
Yeah, so I love this question. And I love this question because it is one of the most common phenomena in human experience. The issue of motivation, the issue of procrastination is true in almost every culture, at almost every stage of life. There are people who are in their 60s, 70s that still have issues of motivation. It is such a big issue, or so common, that it has spawned literally tens of thousands of books written on the topics, literally thousands of like workshops and self-help gurus who talk about motivation, literally neuroscience and psychology that talks about like dopamine reward pathways and other neurochemicals. And so like, one of the reasons I think it's so interesting is because it's actually a really fascinating part of the human experience. And yet we reduce it to this issue of like, if you're unmotivated, you're bad. Or if you procrastinate, you're lazy. Like we get really moralistic about it. Like you're somehow a weak person for experiencing something that's so common and so natural. And so I like to flip it. I like to have students say like, cool, I'm experiencing lack of motivation, or I'm experiencing procrastination. Let's look at it. Like, what's that about? Like, really, like, let's actually get curious about it. Can we take the judgment away from it for a second? Can we take the morality away from it, so that usually when people say, I struggle with motivation, what they're not saying is, and I hate that, or, and I think that's bad, or, and I think I'm a bad person because of it, right? There's an anxiety underneath this question of I struggle with motivation, I struggle with discipline. And of course I know that because I've experienced it as well. And if that's the case, right, if the issue of motivation and procrastination is very tied to anxiety and stress, those are the things you want to look at. What is the source of your anxiety? What's the source, like, really? And you're going to have to ask some potentially like difficult questions. What is causing you fear, right? What's at the heart of that? For many people, sometimes it has to do with overwhelm. Sometimes it has to do with like fear of failure. Sometimes it has to do with like expectations that are set on them externally, right? And you have to have a relationship with those things if you're actually going to fundamentally deal with your motivation or with the self-discipline. Otherwise, you're always going to be like slapping a band-aid over it, right? The answer to like, how do I deal with like the existential anxiety that I'm going to fail my parents is not use your calendar. You know what I mean? Calendar's not going to fix that for you. Like it might help structure your time a little bit, but fundamentally it will kick the issue down the line a little bit more. So that's why I love this question, because people don't really realize when they ask it that it points to something very, very deep. And the possibility of looking at it very deeply is actually that you free yourself from that anxiety, even temporarily, even for a little bit, right? If you can actually come into contact with that part of you that feels a little bit scared or feels worried, or right, then you can be compassionate with yourself, right? You can be empathetic with yourself, because you're suffering, right? And the answer to suffering is always compassion. So it's a great question if you can really look at it and kind of be curious about it and understand its origins.
Thank you, Luke. Well, the next question, that was, I feel attacked when you said it, I guess with all of our panelists and attendees as well, but that's really, something that we need longer than this to think about. The next question is, how can I make my gap year meaningful if I just graduated from high school and plan to apply this fall?
I can take this one. I think I would start with SMART goals, right? Understand your time management. You have to know what your essays are like, right? How much time actually do you have, right? The reality is, if it's July and middle of July and you haven't, quote unquote, started your gap year yet, and your applications are due in January, you have a pretty discrete period of time. You want to figure out, like, what can I actually realistically do in the next couple of months? And the way you want to answer that question is, what would make me feel excited, right? I have 2 months, I have 3 months. What would make me feel excited? Is it learning a technique? Is it learning something? Is it reading a bunch of books, right? You have to define for yourself what meaningful feels like or looks like. You're not going to learn an entirely new language from scratch. So you do need to be a little bit realistic about what are your other time commitments. I don't know what your other time commitments are, so I can't really tell you like the scale of thing that you can consider. And there are also things that are incremental. If you want to start something that you're not going to be able to finish until next year after your applications are done, that's fine. Just make sure you have some benchmarks that you can hit between, right? If you're starting a new organization, right, that you build a team before your application is, or get enough participants, or set an event that actually is going to be scheduled, as an example. Benchmarks that are incremental will really help give you a sense of progress. And maybe that can be what you think of as meaningful. The question of what is meaningful is a highly subjective question. And so it really depends on what you value that will determine whether or not it is meaningful. And that requires kind of knowing what's important to you.